Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about Honda S2000 and top things that I dislike since owning this car. Now, I've had this car for about nearly 8 months now, and the internet might have you believe that this car is nearly perfect, and let me tell you, it actually is, but it's not all Disneyland. You know, there's some things that I actually wish the car offered more since owning this. I've tried searching up this topic on YouTube, top 5 things people dislike about owning this car, and a lot of it sounded like nonsense in my opinion. People were complaining about the lack of power. Yeah, it's not 400 horsepower like every other sports car out there nowadays, but 0 to 60 in 5.8, 5.9 seconds if you're really skilled is still faster than your average traffic out there. You know, this thing actually gets up to speed quite quickly if you're really trying. And then other people, you know, they're complaining about the trunk space, lack of cup holders. One person was complaining about the color of the dashboard because they weren't sure if it was yellow or orange. I don't know. Who really cares about those things? None of those really seem like good points or major issues that could have been potential deal breakers for me or for you when buying this car. So here are my top 5 general gripes with having this car or living with this car, and whether you should, you know, consider or reconsider buying this in 2024 or 25, whenever you're watching this. Let's get into it. Alright, so number 1, first off, my biggest gripe with owning this car, or at least since owning it, you know, maybe this is something with convertibles in general, not S2000 specific. You know, I love driving this thing so much. I love the raw feel, the sound, the nostalgia, the smell of the older Hondas. You know, I wish I could drive this thing as much as possible, whether it's just going to Target, going to the gym, whatever type of errand. But from my experience or where I live, my situation, what I've learned, at least here in Vegas, you have to be extremely selective when you want to take this thing out. This is my first time owning a convertible, so my first time living with it during the summer. And just having this car was just such a tease, seeing it sit in my garage or in the driveway. not being able to drive it around like 2-3 p.m. You know, 120-degree weather, midday rush hour, probably going to be a little bit of a pain trying to drive it to Target or wherever you want to go. You'll burn, you'll sweat, the AC will be blowing cold air into your face, but the rest of your body will be melting essentially. Obviously, that's if you're driving with the roof down and giving yourself skin cancer, but what if you just throw the roof on? This thing is essentially like a canopy tent. You know, there's no insulation, all the heat kind of seeps in, gets trapped in there. It's already claustrophobic inside with the top up. When I'm in it, it feels like I'm in a 1 to 2 person tent just camping in the middle of summer without any shade. It gets really hot inside. Top it off with the roof on, everything is kind of rattling. NVH is a lot higher. You kind of hear how worn your suspension and bushings are. But for me, it's just driving this car during the summer for more than 20-25 minutes, which is extremely fatiguing. Now, I know this isn't entirely S2000 specific, but even when I went and drove the ND3 Miata, that roof was just way more refined, more modern, more insulated. I felt like I could drive it for like, 45 minutes at a time without sweating. You know, the whole cabin felt a lot cooler. Everything felt more shaded, felt more insulated from your environment. You know, it was actually more drivable during the day, essentially. Situation specific, I understand. You know, if I lived in the Midwest or near the coast, I can drive and there's trees surrounding me, providing all that shade. I can drive along the coast and feel that breeze. But if you're like me and you live in like warmer, dry climates like Vegas, Phoenix, Louisiana, if you're like in hot, humid climates, this is just something that you have to keep in mind when you're wanting to get into like a 2-seater roadster like this. It just makes it so that you can only drive it early morning or during sunset. If I lived in San Diego, 10 out of 10, I would drive this at any chance I can get. But for my situation where I live, like I said, it's just, you have to be extremely selective when you're taking this thing out. All right, number two, moving on to something a little bit more specific with the S2000 is the brakes. The brakes on this car is essentially ass. But you'd imagine a car that was built for precision, control, blank canvas to take onto the track. Honda's pride and joy roadster. You'd expect them to throw some decent brakes into these things. You know, everything that you heard on the internet about how these brakes are mediocre is essentially true. What you have throughout all corners is single piston calipers. When I first got into this, I was like, okay, maybe I just got to replace the front pads and rotors. 2 weeks later, after placebo effect, didn't really feel much of an improvement. And then I was like, maybe if I just change out the fluid. Same thing, 2 weeks later, after placebo effect wore off, I was like, the brakes are still not good enough. Every time I keep going into my STI, that car has 6 piston in the front, 4 in the rear. Feels like I'm stopping a Mini Cooper versus this feels like I'm stopping a Toyota Tundra. So, okay, maybe if I just replace the rear pads and rotors, kind of the same thing. So after I did all 4 corners, changed out the fluid, it still feels like you're stopping a heavier car than it actually is. And again, when comparing it to a car with stronger brakes, feels like the car is heavier than it actually is. Honda probably knew right away that you were going to upgrade everything there is to this car. Maybe that's why they left you with some, average brakes. I understand that I could just upgrade to some aftermarket Brembos, Endless, Willwoods, whatever it is, but I've already spent money replacing all 4 corners, including fluid, with OEM parts. So it's just too much a hassle for me to resell those, take them off, and then just research on which pads I want to get next. I don't know, something to consider when you're getting into this car. Lifestyle improvement, 10 out of 10 would recommend upgrading the brakes on these. Okay, right, moving on to number 3, one of my gripes with buying this car, or at least when shopping for it, is its price. Now, this has been an ongoing issue because everyone, like I said, on the internet will have you believe that this is the most amazing thing ever, which it actually is. You know, the most affordable, best driving experience that you can get into. Everyone's favorite car that they've held on to for the last 10 years and they'll never sell. But like I said, let me tell you that they are 100% right in feeling those ways. You know, I love this thing, don't ask me to sell it even though I'm complaining about it. But all of that comes at a cost. You know, these cars are just getting so expensive now. You know, it's not as bad compared to 2-3 years ago. If you look at today's market in 2024, you know, a beat up condition, 5+ owners, Pimp My Ride modified, 130,000 miles, you're looking at $8, 12, maybe $13,000 for great value spec. Now, just think about what else you can buy at like, you know, $10,000 to $15,000. You know, you have a moderately used Nissan 370Z, a bone stock 86 BRZ, hopefully an unmodified 350Z, mint example RSX Type S, probably ND, NC Miata, you know, the list goes on. And then when you're going higher up to kind of where I ended up, $20,000 to $25,000 range, you're looking at either AP2s with 60,000 to 80,000 miles, AP1s with 40,000 miles. Again, just think about what else you can get at $25,000. Again, 370Z even with less miles, later models. ND Miata, the current gen 86 BRZ, even like a beat up E46 M3 you can get into. Like my friend, he just recently picked up a 987.1 Cayman S for cheaper than this, which has a flat 6 pushing out like 260, 280 horsepower. I have to look that up. And then when you go even higher up, you know, the more mint, unmolested AP2s with 40, 50,000 miles, or even AP1s with close to 10,000 miles, now you're looking at the $35,000 to $40,000 price range. You know, just think about what you can get at $40,000. I understand for me and other S2000 owners, this is a great thing because we're holding on to a gem essentially. But for those, including myself recently, that were on the other side looking for these things, those shopping for their dream S2000, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow to buy a 20 to 25-year-old Honda sports car with 0 torque. But you know, on the bright side, keeping these things expensive keeps those high school hot boys and their slimy hands away from bringing these things to their random takeovers. If this thing were to frequently trade at the $10,000 range, this would essentially be the next Infiniti G35. All right, number 4, probably a little bit less specific to these, but still something that you have to consider. Unless you're paying top dollar for a more pristine condition, you have to be prepared for the unexpected repairs. Yes, it's a Honda, these things can survive day in, day out in the track. Its powertrain is nearly bulletproof, the transmission is solid, the engine's not like your typical EJ, but at the end of the day, you know, it's still a 20-plus-year-old Honda sports car. You're dropping $20,000 to $25,000 on something that'll require more out of your wallet. Whether it be the clutch, the flywheel, the throwout bearing, changing out all the suspension and its bushings, replacing the top that might have a hole or scratch on it. The top itself, like if you're trying to go OEM, costs maybe about $3,000 without labor. Getting into these, you'll probably have worn, chewed up seats because that's typical Honda leather. Maybe your AC will go out, luckily mine hasn't yet. But just something to think about, buying a used sports car, it's always luck of the draw. Always gonna be 50-50. You know, no matter how convincing the previous owner was, no matter how many records they might have documented, older sports cars will always have issues. Getting into something with higher miles, more owners, there's just a higher level of uncertainty on whether the car was like, you know, properly cared for, not beaten up too much, maintained throughout. You know, now if you have $35,000 to $40,000 to drop on a more, you know, pristine condition, by all means go for it. But for me, this is what I could afford. You know, I got mine at the low 20s, around 90,000 miles. It isn't perfect, but this is the best condition, best spec that I could afford at the time. Sure, this isn't the same as buying like a high mileage E46 M3 or 996 Carrera, whatever German sports car counterpart that you can think of. But at the end of the day, like I said, you're still getting an old sports car that used to be someone else's. They probably drove really hard. They probably probably took it to the track. It could be 100% reliable, trouble-free, but compared to buying a newer car, it's all just a matter of luck. And if you're not up for living with that uncertainty, if you're not the type to worry about every new rattle that you hear when you're pushing this car, maybe you might just be better off with something newer like an ND Miata or 86. You know, essentially you're dropping $25,000 for a car that's going to require a little bit even more. So just make sure if you are getting into these things, you have a little bit extra money on the side to come up with whatever unpredicted expense rather than buying TEs or new exhausts. And then lastly, probably one of my other bigger gripes about owning this car, or at least living with it, and something you should probably consider. Probably not entirely S2000 specific, but still something that I realized when driving this car around and trying to enjoy it. When you're in this car, you just feel really vulnerable. In 2024 land, when more and more people are buying 7,000, 8,000 pound Cybertrucks, EV SUVs where you are non-existent in their blind spots, Dodge Rams that are tailgating you 70 miles per hour in the middle lane on the highway, you just don't feel safe when driving this car, especially during rush hour. You know, I'm 100% certain that if a Cadillac Escalade or GMC Yukon hauling their entire family were to plow into me, these airbags are not going to protect me from turning into a pancake. This kind of brings me back to the point where you have to be extremely selective when you're taking this car out. I live in Las Vegas, where not only we're #1 chlamydia, but we're also top ranked in one of the worst city drivers. So people here are just so clueless, so entitled, so aggressive. You know, as much as I love driving this, I just don't feel safe driving it during the city or just taking it randomly throughout the day. And as much as I want to take this out to experience new places, take photos in different scenarios, you know, I just get so much anxiety with normal traffic around. It could be a personal thing. Maybe you haven't had several close calls like I did, where you're about to cross an intersection and a Toyota Tundra decides to blow the red light, nearly T-bone you. Like I said, if you're like me or if you're not like me, it's something that you should probably consider before getting into one of these toys. It's almost as if you're treating it like owning a street bike. You know, you have to be selective on the hours and the route that you want to take with it. Alright, so there you have it. Top 5 things that I've grown to dislike since owning this car. Just to recap, it's undrivable during the summer. You know, brakes are weak, prices are getting high, you have that used car uncertainties, and then lastly, you just stand no chance if you get into an accident against a modern vehicle. Again, this is all from my personal situation, my experience, you know, not entirely S2000 specific. It might not be a full deal breaker for you, but for me, this is just what I notice and sometimes what makes me wish I were to have a little bit more modern, something that's a little bit more comfortable, better value, safer, and again, less uncertainties. Nonetheless, don't let those people tell you about the trunk space, lack of cup holders, non-existent torque and power, the color of the dash, whether it's yellow or orange. Don't let any of that be deal breakers for you. Don't let that steer you away from getting into one of these amazing machines. You know, instead, consider these points that I talked about, my experiences that I've mentioned, whether it kind of relates to you, whether you're comfortable with dropping nearly $30,000 for something like this. Because nonetheless, at the end of the day, despite all those things I complain about, you know, I still absolutely love this car, and don't ask me to sell it. To me, it just looks amazing. It's always been my dream car. I love seeing this in my garage, in my driveway. I love the sound of that VTEC. I love the smell of the older Hondas. You know, I just like randomly taking this around 2 a.m. when the streets are empty. For me, it just brings you an experience like no other that modern sports cars can't offer. But yeah, anyways, let me know what you guys think. If you guys have one, what other quirks or gripes might have I not mentioned? You know, are these points that I talked about huge deal breakers for you? Or, you know, are you gonna still full on send it? Anyways, thanks for your guys' time. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, bye.